Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming here. This is part of the Hispanic Heritage Month activities. We are starting on a very high note with Dr. Cham and his lecture on the power of procrastination. This is brought to you by the William James Forum, the Department of Multicultural Affairs, and the Department of Modern Languages. So we really thank you very much for making it to here tonight. So, Jorge Cham was born in Panama. Both of his parents were engineers. And as he said, they told him to be an engineer because he didn't need to memorize anything. So he was like, that's perfect, sign me up. And he went to study engineering. So he earned his PhD in robotics in Stanford University. His undergraduate studies, he did Georgia Tech, yes. And then he became a full-time instructor and researcher at the California Institute of Technology. But he became better known for the comic strip he created while still a graduate student, PhD, Pile Higher and Deeper. And the humorous insider's look at the life of graduate students started to be published online in university newspapers and science journals and became a phenomenon. When he was ready to turn his comic strip into a live-action comedy, he recruited Caltech researchers and staffers as actors and shot on location at the university. More recently, he garnered acclaim and 2 million plays on Vimeo for his work on the Higgs boson explained, an 8-minute video about the so-called God particle. So now he's the co-founder of PhD TV, a video science and discovery outreach collaborative project, and he's the founding board member of Endeavor College Prep, a nonprofit school for kids in East LA. Other fun facts I will say is that he has been in 300 invited lectures here in the US and around the world in all types of campuses. And his PhD comics websites normally has 8 million visitors a year. So, online, he's booming. And on a personal note, I have to tell you that while I was in Vanderbilt University and I was being a grad student, he came and he gave his lecture. And the moment that I saw that, and the moment that I started to read his comics, I realized my life was miserable, yes, but some other lives were miserable too. So I felt happy and relieved. And I also knew that academy was tough, but that you can also laugh about it. So hopefully you're gonna share the laugh with him. And please help me giving him a very warm welcome.
Hey. How's it going? All right, that did not sound very excited. I'll try it again. How's it going? Yeah, not much better. But thank you to Dr. Deanda and the Hispanic Heritage Month for inviting me here today, organizing this great event for you guys, inviting me here. Let's give them a quick round of applause, please. Yeah. But mostly thank all of you guys for coming to this event. I know it's, Wednesday night. It's the end of a beautiful day here for Chestertown. And I'm sure right now at this hour, most of you would much rather be, working on your homeworks, studying for your exams. But instead, you're here to procrastinate, right? That's why you're here. So today, I'm just going to talk to you a little bit about kind of how I became a cartoonist. I'm a professional full-time cartoonist. So I'm just going to kind of talk to you about how that happened for me. And I'm going to talk to you about grad school. So I was reading on the Wikipedia page about Washington College that about half of you will end up going to some kind of grad school for your master's or your PhD. And so how many of you here are thinking about or planning on going to graduate school afterwards? All right. So I'll ask you again after the lecture to see how you feel. So I was a graduate student. I got my PhD in robotics at Stanford University, as was mentioned earlier. And my research, my thesis, was about making small robots that could run like cockroaches. Yeah, that's your tax dollars at work right there. It's funded by the government. But here's a quick movie of what these robots actually look like. All right, so I like to show this movie at my presentations because, I feel like this movie of the robot really kind of conveys what grad school felt like. Like, if you have any friends or any relatives who went there, they'll tell you that, it kind of feels like you're running the whole time frantically trying to catch up, but you're not getting anywhere. And meanwhile, there's more intelligent beings kind of stamping you down the whole time. But I also like to show this movie because it's really the only way that I can get anyone to look at my research. Because, I spent all those years working on these robots, but by far more popular, apparently, than that work that I was doing for my career, what I was my job that I was focused on, by far more popular has been what I was doing when I was procrastinating, when I should have been doing research, which is to make these comics called Piled Higher and Deeper, which is, it stands for PhD. So how it all started for me was that, I was in grad school in my first term, and I saw it like in the school newspaper, like you guys have here probably. They were asking people to submit ideas for comic strips. I remember thinking at the time that, there are kind of a lot of stories about what it's like to be in grad school, to be a PhD student, to be a master's student that you really don't see in popular culture very much, right? All the TV shows and movies, they're always about, all the dramas, they're always about cops, right? And lawyers, right? They're always about the doctors. I mean, the real doctors. The kind that help people. But you never see much about like that, how people get to be like professors and researchers or scientists, right? And so I remember asking myself the question, who is this strange creature called a graduate student? What's going on inside of their complex and complicated brains? And it turned out that apparently it's not that complicated. Most of the people that I knew weren't these kind of crazy, eccentric stereotypes that, you see portrayed in popular culture all the time. Whenever they try to feature a scientist or a grad student or anyone who just happens to be smart, they always resort to these kind of stereotypes and caricatures. Big Bang Theory. But, actually, if you ever meet a graduate student, you'll probably find that they're just kind of regular people, They're mostly just trying to survive the experience, just like maybe you guys are trying to survive your experience here. And they were mostly just trying to survive what it's like to be a graduate student, which involves a lot of meetings, one-on-one meetings with your professors, where you have to do a lot of begging. Like literally, you have to beg them to do free work for them. What it's like to be a teaching assistant or to teach a course. What it's like to have those late night project sessions. Learning about grad student etiquette. If you ever have a friend or a family who's going to grad school, never ask them how their research is going. And then also about, kind of oral examinations that happen in grad school. But it wasn't just kind of about me, I was also kind of writing about my friends, the people I met there. And so there were other characters like Cecilia, who was often the only woman in her class in some disciplines like physics or computer science or engineering, who often had a hard time admitting that she is in fact a geek. We also had a token humanities graduate student. She's always protesting something. And then, like any kind of sitcom or any kind of comic strip, you always gotta have that old kind of grizzled character, the one who's been there longer than anyone can remember, Mike Slackernerney. Whose job it is to, educate the newbies in the ways of kind of grad school and academia. So exactly, money, a social life, a shave, a PhD student needs not such things. Which may kind of sound ridiculous, but that was actually said to me my first year. So it's not all fiction, these comics. And then, and a lot of times what happens in grad school too is you have to not only manage your professors and what they expect from you, but you also have to manage your boyfriends and your girlfriends and your spouses and their expectations. And so, I was just a student there, and I was drawing these comics for the newspaper. And, I think the comics kind of resonated with a lot of people there because, not just because they could maybe identify with the jokes or identify with the characters. I think, people kind of liked it because the theme of the comics, the subtext of it, was always about asking the real question about grad school, the big question, which is, why? Why do it, right? That's probably what you're thinking right now. Why go to grad school? Because I'm pretty sure that nobody who ever goes into it really does it for the money. So this is a survey at the time when I started drawing the comics. I was like, hey, I wonder how much grad students make. And I looked up these surveys of all these disciplines to be a teaching assistant or a research assistant. And you can take the average of all these to get a figure equal to $14,055 as a kind of general idea, of how much you'd be paid as a graduate student doing research or teaching, which is not, it's not bad, right? You're probably thinking, that sounds pretty good, right? I could survive if I eat at McDonald's every day. But, let's compare that for some perspective. Let's compare that to how much you would be earning if you worked at McDonald's. Earning minimum wage in California, you'd be getting paid around, yes, whew, $15 less. Yeah, I am loving it. Last year I got curious too, and I was like, hey, I wonder what that figure is nowadays. And it turns out nowadays, if you take the average, it's more like 18,000, almost 19,000, which sounds like a lot of money, right? But until you compare that to how much the government would pay you if you were unemployed with a bachelor's degree in some kind of field, you would be getting from the government, which kind of tells you that it pays more to do nothing than it does to pursue that. So that didn't quite make a lot of sense, right? Like, why do people do it? But I kept drawing these things, these comics, and I put them on a free website on campus. And I think what happened was that people who read it there, they would tell their friends that they knew in other universities or other colleges, and then they would tell their friends and around them, and then they would tell their classmates and the other people in other universities. And so slowly over the years, this thing kind of went out into the internet and into the world. And it's actually very interesting for me to find out that these jokes and these stories weren't just applicable to like one university. Apparently, it's like a global misery phenomenon. So this is a list of all the universities of the people who subscribe to the website, just to kind of give you a sense of like how crazy this experience is. And it was also interesting to find out it wasn't just limited to like robotics or engineering, which is where I was coming from. People from all kinds of disciplines were reading these comics. So here's a list of all those people's majors. I'm not going to scroll it because we can read some of these because they're interesting, right? Like there's art history grad students. They're reading the same comics as people who are studying brain and cognitive science, or what's this one here? Buddhist studies. guess you can get an MS and BS also. But yeah, that was kind of like, whoa, that's crazy, right? And so then what was even more interesting is I started to hear back from all these people. Like people would write me, and I can roughly categorize the emails I get into these 4 types. So the first one I usually get kind of goes something like, oh God, I break down in Christ and I read your comics and I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Which, you know, makes me feel good. Knowing that I'm making thousands of people weep. Yeah, you're welcome. But people also like thank me. They're like, hey, Jorge, thanks for drawing these comics. You're helping me slack off. I'm supposed to be doing research on some very important thing that will save millions of people's lives. But instead, I just spent days surfing your website. So you're welcome, humanity. Then I get a third type of comment where people write me and say, hey, your girl character, Cecilia, is so hot. Can I marry her? And so this type of comment disturbs me a little bit. Right? Because A, she's an imaginary comic character in a cartoon, and B, she's my imaginary girlfriend. So back off. Make up your own imaginary girlfriends. Or boyfriends. Yeah, but then I get a fourth type of comment through the website. People sometimes say, hey, Jorge, you make me feel less alone. Your comic is probably responsible for keeping many of us sane. So when I usually get that comment, I usually go, aw, you know? It's like, hey, that's kind of the power of the internet, right? Making people feel connected to each other, making them see that they're not the only people kind of going through these, through whatever difficulty it is that they're going through. You know, it makes me think that all these comics and all these procrastination is not just a huge waste of time. You know, maybe it's just kind of a medium-sized waste of time. Because I also read a while back this survey they did at the University of California at Berkeley where they sent a questionnaire to their grad students asking about their mental health. And what they found here, they found, first of all, that 95%, right? 95% of all grad students at some point report feeling overwhelmed in their graduate careers. So that's kind of crazy, right? You're probably thinking, who are these other 5%? What's their secret? I'm guessing they're probably Buddhist studies. That would make sense. A little bit more serious, though, they also found that 67% of them, 2 out of every 3 graduate students, at some point feels hopeless or depressed about their careers, about their workload, about their expectations about them. And so this one is very serious. You know, hopelessness and depression, they're not things we should take too lightly. In fact, it's very serious. Which is why I am here today, you guys, to tell you that there is another way, there is an alternative to hopelessness and depression, and that is the way of procrastination. That's right, procrastination. I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably thinking procrastination, but that's a bad thing, right? Sex, drugs, procrastination. I tell my mom I don't do any of those things. But you know, I think procrastination just gets a bad reputation, gets a bad rap. And I think it gets a bad rap because people very often confuse procrastination with its very close cousin, its very close relative, which is laziness. But I actually argue that procrastination and laziness is not the same thing, right? It's not the same thing, right? Laziness, that's when you don't want to do anything. Procrastination, you just don't want to do it now. I'll let you think about that for a second. It's not the same thing, procrastination and laziness. And in fact, if you look it up in the dictionary, all it says is that it's to postpone or delay needlessly, which kind of sounds like a negative thing. But I think it actually gives us a loophole. Because if you can find the need for it, maybe it's not so bad. And in fact, I think there are many examples throughout history where procrastination has worked out for the best. So, for example, here's a list of famous procrastinators in history, going all the way back to Isaac Newton. And the story of how the apple fell on him, I think the real question here is, what was he doing under that tree? Right? He certainly wasn't like in the lab working, right? There's also Albert Einstein. I bet Einstein's mother would have loved for him to have worked hard at the patent office where he had his real job. And, made his way up to middle management just like he was supposed to do for his actual career. But instead, he spent a lot of time working on physics equations, kind of on the side, which, kind of worked out for Albert there, right? Relatively speaking. Sorry about that. But yeah, and there's also the story of Isaac Asimov. I don't know how many of you guys know he's a famous science fiction writer. He invented robots or something. But Isaac Asimov, he's a famous writer. It took him 10 years to get his PhD in chemistry from Columbia. 10 years, yeah. So that's a picture of Asimov before going to grad school. Here's a picture of him after. Before, after. And in fact, later on in his life, he wrote in his memoirs, Asimov, he wrote that, when he was a student, his professor actually told him to his face that he was a bad writer. He told him, you're a bad writer. And so he's like, despite, that kind of criticism, he spent a lot of time working on what turned out to be some of the most amazing science fiction novels of the whole century. Finally, a few more modern heroes of procrastination are the Yahoo and the Google guys. Is there anyone in this room here today who does not use Yahoo or Google for your homework? Yeah, so both companies were actually started by students. And in fact, legend has it that Jerry Yang and David Filo's professor just happened to go on sabbatical when one of them said to the other, hey, our professor's not here right now. Hey, why don't we try to categorize the entire internet before he comes back? That is some legendary procrastination. There's also, I think, real science behind procrastination. For example, there's a study done by a cognitive psychologist called Teresa Amabile who found through experiments that things she calls extrinsic motivators, so outside pressures, when someone's telling you that you have to do something or you should do something because there's a contest or there's a reward or there's going to be an award at the end, it actually tends to make people feel more controlled and tends to decrease their creative thinking. Also, they've looked at people's brain activity with fMRI machines, and they looked at their brain activity while trying to solve problems that require insight. So when you're trying to solve, kind of open-ended, difficult problems that require insight, their hypothesis is that you need to be thinking in a kind of low-grade, almost unconscious brain activity type of thinking, so that if you actually think about it too much or you focus on it too hard on the problem, you can actually suppress or prevent some of these important connections making that happens between different parts of your brain. Yeah. That's right. I have references in this lecture with et al. And everything. Look at that. But I think despite all this history in science, right, procrastination has kind of a negative feeling about it, right? Negative stigma about it in society, and especially I find in academia. And so then I asked myself the question, why is that? What's really the problem with procrastination? And so I thought about this question for a long time, perhaps too long. But I think the answer to this question has something to do with this very typical conversation that I always find myself having with students, no matter where I go, anywhere in the world. And this conversation always goes like this. You go up to a student and you say, hey, how's it going? And they usually reply with the same enthusiasm you guys replied with earlier, something along the lines of, oh God, I am so stressed, I'm trying to graduate, I have all these things I have to do, I've been sleeping 3 hours a night. And so you go, whoa, that's crazy, 3 hours a night, that's insane, right? That's not healthy. I mean, that must mean that you're working, really, you're working 21 hours a day? And they usually go, no, I went out, I watched TV, and I'm organizing this event for the campus underwater basketball with Screw Marcher. Jesse, pick your favorite obscure hobby club because I'm the chapter president of this club. And so you go, oh? And then they go, but I should be doing research. I'm supposed to be working right now. And so I thought, aha, the real problem with procrastination is not that there aren't enough hours in the week to do all your work, your homeworks, your projects, and also pursue all your hobbies and your interests. It's not that there's a lack of time. The problem really seems to be all about guilt. I always get an uncomfortable silence here. Everyone's going, right? Because the thing about college and about academia and about kind of being out there on your own is that it sort of never ends, right? There's always at any given time, any given moment of the day or night, there's always something else that you should be doing, that you could be doing, that you're supposed to be doing at any given moment. There's always more papers you could be writing, more funding you could be applying for, more books you could be reading, more homework or lab experiments you could be doing, more analysis you could be running, more talks you could be preparing, more equipment you could be fixing. Whereas I think you'll find that later on, people who have regular jobs, like 9-to-5 jobs, office jobs, they find it easier to leave everything at the office at the end of the day and then just go home and relax. If you go into academia or any kind of open-ended field like that, you'll find that it sort of never ends, right? You always have this constant anxiety of always feeling like there's something that you should be doing, that you could be doing, and you're supposed to be doing. And yet you find yourself a lot of the time basically not doing these things. You're like, why? Why did I not do that? Why did I wait so long? And so then I ask myself the question, like, why is that? Like if you have all these things that you're supposed to be doing, that you should be doing, that you could be doing, why can't we just do them? Why can't we just do the things we're supposed to do instead of procrastinating and then you feel guilty and depressed about it to the point where you don't even enjoy those things that you used to enjoy before? Well, I thought about this question also for a long time. And I think the answer in this case, bear with me, I think the answer in this case has something to do with the fact that we just don't want to do them. You see, this is all related to my grand theory. I have a grand theory, guys, about procrastination. And this theory, I like to call it my unified theory of procrastination in academia. Which can't be wrong, because come on, look at that acronym, it's perfect. But this theory of mine goes back to what I call in early comics the Newton's laws of graduation. So I know you guys, all of you have to write a thesis to graduate, right? Yeah, so you might find yourself procrastinating on writing that thesis. And so there's actually, I found a kind of a law for that. So the first law of graduation says that a graduate student, or any student in procrastination, tends to stay in procrastination unless an external force is applied to it. This is formalized more in the second law of graduation, which says that the HA of a doctoral process or master's thesis or bachelor's thesis process is directly proportional to the flexibility F given by the advisor and inversely proportional to student's motivation, M, which we can write as an equation as A shows your thesis equals flexibility over motivation, which we can abbreviate as A equals F over M, which we can rewrite as F equals MA. Everybody knows you can't argue with F equals MA. Unless, of course, you're moving at close to the speed of light, right? Which, let's face it, never happens when you're in college. Yeah, so let's explore this equation in more detail. And like how long, so basically the equation is how long it takes you to do something is equal to the amount of flexibility you're given to do it divided by how much you're personally motivated to do it. And so this got me thinking, like, like people in grad school, what really motivates people in graduate school? Because, I think most people who go into it, are bright, enthusiastic young people, You probably graduate from here, you're feeling pretty good about yourself, ready to take that next step and turn the corner and face the challenges of more schooling. But it actually turns out to look more like that. Or if you were to plot this in the motivator meter, we usually see motivation start off really high in graduate school, but then quickly that first year, it all comes crashing down. And it all comes crashing down for a lot of people because I think, first of all, you have to get used to being average. Maybe a lot of people who go into it are, pretty good. They're pretty at the top of their class. Maybe in high school they were valedictorians. But then once you get to college or once you get to grad school, you find that you have to kind of deal with the fact that you're a little bit average now. Also, you find, for example, you might be number one before, but it turns out everybody was number one. Also, you find out grad school actually makes you dumber, contrary to what is advertised. Because, before you go to grad school, you feel pretty good because, you graduated and the ratio between what you think you know and what you think you know don't know is pretty good. Then you'll get to grad school and you'll already forget everything you learned. But you'll find out how much you don't know, right? Because you'll be surrounded by all these experts in their fields and all these really brilliant people. And then what happens to a lot of people is then they'll start to compare themselves. You know who I'm talking about, right? Those overachievers. Cranks out all those papers, gets all those A's, makes you want to. But don't do it. Trust me. Yeah, you end up comparing yourself to other people, to your peers, to your professors, and you end up feeling like an imposter. It's actually something that happens to everyone throughout the university, is that you feel like an imposter. It's called the Imposter Syndrome, which is when you think that maybe the only reason they let you into the college or into graduate school is a clerical mistake. You feel like you're not as smart as everybody else, that you somehow fooling people, right? That you just don't belong. Still, you kind of hang in there. A lot of people hang in there, and maybe they get excited about the research until they find out it's impossible and that somebody else already did it. Maybe they get motivated about quals or candidacy exams or kind of finals, but then they actually pass. And it's like they can't even get out of bed anymore. Still, they hang in there. You hang in there in grad school with your ego shattered, and you slowly claw your way back up until that one day when you kind of get that phone call. You get that phone call from your friend. That friend that did not go to grad school. And you'll be talking to them and you're like, hey, I'm in grad school. How's it going with you? And they'll be like, oh, yeah, life is awesome. We have this beautiful family. We just had a baby. Like a real baby. All the pictures are on Facebook. In fact, their profile picture is a baby, which is kind of weird, right? But yeah, they're like, yeah, we have this nice job, we drive a nice car now, we just bought a house. And you're like, what? You can buy houses? What? Nobody told me that. They're like, yeah, and then meanwhile you'll realize you're all by yourself, still in grad school, alone at night, eating ramen noodles for breakfast. And a lot of people kind of freak out, right? A lot of PhD students, a lot of master's students freak out because then fear kind of sets in, right? You get afraid of failure, right? Because a lot of people get invested in their achievements and what people think of them, other people think of them and their accomplishments, and so they're afraid of what will happen if they actually kind of move on. Except the problem is you also sometimes get fear of moving on. Because, you know, academia can be a pretty comfortable place, right? You can walk into your office or your lab at, what, like 10 a.m., right? 11 a.m., noon, or not at all. And so a lot of people kind of freak out because they're afraid of, like, oh my God, if I actually graduate, then I have to decide what I want to be when I grow up. You know, you're sort of afraid of rejoining the real world after you've been in such a sheltered environment for so long. You're afraid of rejoining the real world beyond the walls of the university. It's kind of like what happens to people in prison. You guys seen the Shawshank Redemption? You know what I'm talking about. Yeah, a lot of people freak out and they end up procrastinating a lot. So you'll hear this a lot, grad students procrastinating a lot. I'm sure maybe some of it is happening to you, where you're afraid of what will happen or you're afraid to make a decision and so you procrastinate a lot. And so my message to you guys here today is that procrastination, it's okay. It's okay because, you know, a very kind of significant personal moment for me during my graduate degree was to take a class from this professor called Bernie Roth. And Bernie Roth is this world-famous, world-renowned authority and expert in the field of kinematics and robotics. Perhaps you've never heard of him. But Bernie Roth is also kind of a groovy 70s kind of dude, and so he would always challenge his class. He would always say, like, hey guys, I want you to tell me, just like I'm going to challenge you guys here right now, I want you to tell me what are some of the things in life that you have to do? Like, let's start with that. What are the things that you have to do in life? You have to eat, breathe, you have to sleep, right? You have to do your homework, you have to pay your taxes, you have to get a job. And so Bernie's point was that, you know what, in life, there's really nothing that you have to do. Like, people use that word all the time, like, oh man, I have to finish this homework, I have to go to the library, I have to graduate, I have to get a job. Bernie's point was that really nobody's making you do any of these things, not even to eat, not even to breathe, not even to pay your taxes. You know, everything you do, he would say, everything you do, every action you make, you do it because you want to do it. And so I thought, hey, that's pretty interesting. Like, if that's true, if everything you do it because you want to do it, then I say that procrastination is what you do when you're doing what you want to be doing. Right? If everything you do it because you want to do it, then even procrastination has that kind of equal value, and so it's a good thing, right? Just ignore the logical fallacy here. Just nod and smile. Yeah, basically the main point is to maybe just relax a little bit. Enjoy your time in college, enjoy your time in graduate school, and listen to your inner procrastinator. Listen to your inner procrastinator. Because it might be trying to tell you something about what you're passionate about or what it is that you really want to be doing with your life, with your present moment, with whatever. Now, I know what you guys might be thinking right now, which is, hey, Jorge, Dr. Cham, that's great. That's all great. But what if I never graduate? How does this philosophy help me get out of Chestertown? Please. Well, fortunately for everyone in existence ever, there are other terms in the equation. So as small as this bottom term here may get for you, inevitably the upper term up here will get even smaller. So inevitably what happens is that, the final, usually what happens, although people kind of stress out about it and they freak out about it, usually what happens is that the final kind of push, the final decision to finish something is essentially made for you. Inevitably what happens is you run out of time, you run out of money, and so you just grab everything that you had, put it all into one document, check that all the margins are the right. That's very important, you guys. And then just shipped it out the door. Because one of the things I notice is that, if you talk to anyone who has finished their thesis at any level, if you talk to anyone, even your professors, I bet if you go up to a professor and you ask him like, hey, professor, were you 100% happy with the final thesis that you submitted at the end? Most likely, I would bet they'll tell you like, oh, I wasn't 100% happy. Most likely, they'll tell you they ran out of time, they ran out of money, they were expecting a baby, they had to take a job somewhere, or they found a job they really, really wanted. And so all of a sudden, they had this deadline they did not want to miss. Because the other thing I noticed is that, anyone who's ever, if you look at any of the famous people in your fields of research or your field of study, you look at the work they're famous for, most likely it's not for the work they did as students, right, or graduate students. Most likely it's for what they did afterwards, right? When they had grad students do the work for them. So at some point you realize these things and you ramp up the motivation chart, and then it gets a little bit bumpy, which I don't have time to cover here today. I'll leave that for my future work. All the professors laughed at this joke. Because it's really funny. Anyways. But yeah, the other thing I always try to tell students is that, I think sometimes we stressed out when you're a student because you kind of think your professors, you form this image in your head of your professors, what they must think of you, and that they're judging you. And so I always tell people that, relax, I'm guessing probably your professor probably doesn't think you're an idiot, You don't have to think of them as these omnipotent beings, these gods that are looking down on you. Because most likely, he or she doesn't spend that much time thinking about you. And so, just to wrap up here, I feel like I have to have this slide because, people are going to see these comics and these presentations I give, and they must think that I have a very cynical view about graduate school, and that I would recommend that you don't go to grad school. But actually, the opposite is true. I do recommend, people ask me all the time, like, hey, do you wish that you had not gone to grad school, or do you wish you had quit grad school earlier? But I always tell people that, no, I'm really glad that I went to graduate school. I find it incredibly rewarding. I feel like I learned a lot of very important skills that are going to help me, not just in academia if I had stayed on there, but I think you learn a lot of very important skills, transferable skills they're called, that will help you into whatever career you choose for yourself, even being a cartoonist. Very important skill. Here's the list of my favorite things I learned in grad school. Grad school, first of all, most important, I learned you get pretty good with making PowerPoint presentations because you have to make a lot of them. You also get pretty good at making bullet point lists. But the most important thing I think that you learn in grad school is how to give a 1-hour presentation on any topic, even procrastination. Now, I joke around a little bit with this, but I'm actually serious. If you ever find yourself in grad school and you go to grad school, what you learn is you learn kind of the ability to teach yourself anything technical that you need to learn. You actually find that you don't need professors anymore. You can pick up anything that you want to learn by yourself. You learn the ability to kind of think more analytically. but not necessarily spell, analytically, and be able to kind of break the problems down into their components. And you also kind of learn the ability to keep in mind the big picture of things. Kind of your brain kind of expands a little bit more. And you're also able to communicate that with other people. Now everyone's really disappointed because there was a moral to this story. So I'll leave you guys with the words of the character in the comic strip, Mike Slackernerney, who said, "Grad school is a state of mind." And which state would that be? Preferably sleeping, which you are interrupting. Now go away. So thank you. I can tell you all about the Panama Canal. Does anyone want to? Questions? They don't have to be in Spanish, guys. They can be any language. All right. All right, we have one question. Yeah. Do I do anything robotics related? Like, do I do anything related to all those years of work that I... No. No, I mean, for a while after I left and I was doing cartooning, I would still like review papers just for fun. But no, actually, I now do this full time. So, but you know, people ask me if I have any regrets. But no, actually, if you kind of ask around and if you look around, you'll find that nobody, like 5 years after they graduate, very few people are still doing that same thing that they studied in college or in graduate school. You know, life is going to take you through so many turns and unexpected decisions that, you know, it almost kind of, like what you actually study doesn't matter. It's kind of what you learn and how to think and how to get things done and how to process and how to deal with people. That's the most important thing you keep. I feel like such an optimist. I'm not usually this optimistic.
Robot that you had in the opening video?
Yep.
What were the actuators? Were they pneumatic or fluidic?
What were the actuators in the robot? Were they pneumatic or hydraulic or? I was not expecting that question. I have my research presentation here. Do you have another hour? We could. They're pneumatic, yeah. Yeah, but later they switched to electrical. The next minute, electrical. Yeah. Actually, if you look it up, you can look up Sprawlbot on YouTube. There's pictures of the robot like running around. It's pretty cool. Yep. How long was I in grad school? Did you learn nothing from this? You're not supposed to ask that question. I would say I was there. A number of years. No, actually, I was there for like 5 years. It took me 5 years, 5.5, something like that. Yeah. So imagine all the time you spend in college and doing it again. Think about how much your mind expands from a freshman to a senior, right? And then think about how much your mind would expand if you spend another 4 years learning stuff. That's kind of what grad school feels like. I'm actually like recruiting people for grad school. That's so weird.